Greetings to our YouTube audience listening and watching. Thank you for tuning in. Either for our first time or once again, great to have you also as a part of this community. Nice, very full room this morning. Greetings again to anybody watching on screen. I am so privileged to have this opportunity to speak as the presider for chapel on various Sundays, and interested in the alignment of the topic of the day, which is a thing that chapel has developed, and also the calendar in the world in which we live. And the readings today will mark the Orthodox Christian New Year, a Hindu observation called Magi, but also many of those of us in the United States are in the middle of a 3-day weekend, because Monday is the holiday that observes the life and witness and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And you might be surprised to know, given my evident cultural and ethnic background, that the Reverend Dr. King was a profound influence on me in seminary. And I went from atheist to pastor, as also I went from active addict to person in recovery. And by the time I ended up going to seminary, a lot had changed for me, but that particular year, which was 1994, I was in my 5th year of sobriety, and the training for me to onboard to seminary was rather bold, given my limited formation about religious and theological issues. They threw me into a congregation as a student pastor with barely any training at all. And one of the things that happened in that first summer before I started seminary in September was an exposure to an African American clergy summit that one of my friends in 2 weeks of pastor boot camp had invited me to. And in that African American clergy summit, I heard preaching, music, and felt the sense of this community of African American, largely African American congregations within the Methodist tradition that were remembering that their legacy and history came out of enslavement. And so their spirit was of freedom, their songs spoke of deliverance from captivity, and here I was, this white guy in this revival, and I was totally unaccustomed to 90 minutes of warm-up music and then a 45-minute sermon. But I did day 1, day 2, day 3. The preaching was great, the music was amazing, and in the middle of it, I was almost like, I don't know if any of you know, there's an old movie called Animal House, and John Belushi has this moment when the light comes through the stained glass window and just flips his switch, and he goes and does cartwheels down the aisle of a church. I had like a John Belushi woo moment, and what I realized was, I have been freed. That was like the feeling. I was like, I have been freed. So this music can be my music. This preaching can be my preaching, even though it was not targeted towards the particular belonging that I manifest through my, my upbringing and my cultural background and all that sort of stuff. And so this began a fondness that I have had for all these, now another 30 years. I just recently marked 35 years of sobriety, so that was 5 years in. So for 30 years, I have retained the passion that I have for the songs of freedom and the civil rights movement. And over time, I would make it a project for me to listen to a lot of Dr. King. In fact, I tried to listen to the entire audio record library of his spoken addresses, which was just amazing. What a great preacher and speaker. And that's still very much in me. So, as it happens, in a beautiful synchronicity, I don't know if you know that word, but that's like more than mere coincidence. Today is not only the Martin Luther King holiday weekend, but the topic for today is freedom. And I'm like, yeah, we can put those two together. And I'm sure, I didn't go back to look at the calendar, but I'm sure that alignment has happened once before, which it kind of shouldn't, because I have 19 topics at the moment, and there are 52 weeks in a year. So why the same topic would align with the same holiday, I'm quite confused about. But I remember previous times when I talked about, maybe I just talked about Dr. King and not on the holiday and talking about freedom. That's probably more likely. Anyway, the very last time I had the privilege of addressing this subject, which I think was maybe late summer, in the chapel, you might tell, since I'm not having a script and I'm capable of wandering off, sorry, watch you, but at the end, and then I can get really fired up, and at the end of my last address on the subject of freedom, that happened. I went off script, and I said something right near the close of my message, which was basically, I was in a rant, and I was like, people come to Caron and they call it captivity. They talk about, like getting released, and they act like they're prisoners. And I'm like, this is not prison. This is, and what I said was, this is like when hostages get released and they get put in a special place before they get returned to their home, right? Because they have to get fed, they have to get nourished, they have to get taken care of. And I wanted to say, stop thinking about this as jail. Think about this as reintegration into a non-captive existence. Well, I'm going to tell you, when that tumbled out of me, the next day I was like, ooh, that's an interesting metaphor. And then when I was getting ready to address this message this week, it came back to me that I had somehow bled that. So I did a little research around what is called hostage reintegration. And I want to talk to you a little bit about it because the stuff I started reading was so Caron, and AA, and addiction clinical work. It was the alignment was so spot on that I think it has things to say. It had things to say to me, and I hope it has things to say to you. So it turns out the U.S. military has, over the years, not surprisingly, going back to prisoners of war and today, with terrorism and all that stuff being, the landscape of military engagement has changed a great deal from 100 more years ago, and will probably continue to change. But there are still people who are taken captive in military settings and then have the experience of being released. And so the United States military has a process, and they have documentation, they have training, they have steps for hostage reintegration. I'm not sure I'm using the right term for it, but I found several articles about it, including a very careful study of the process to ask if the process that the military uses is best practices and if it's to be used in any and all circumstances or whatever. And what the study showed was not that the military system was either exactly right or perfect. They were not able to have enough data to sort of show outcomes and not. But what the bottom line of the study was that this process has value for many, if not all. And that people who are coming out of hostage experience in which they intersect with the United States military will often benefit from some sort of structured reintegration process, which makes a lot of sense. Because you can't just pluck somebody out of 4 days, 4 months, 4 years of captivity and just tell them, okay, you're good. They're not going to do well. There's a lot of shockwave that's yet to be experienced. It's sort of common sense. But in this really richly detailed article, there were 3 phases for the reintegration process. And I want to tell you a little bit about each one, and then I want to draw a connection to many of your experience. So some of the people in the room here are what I'm talking about, hostages being reintegrated, because I think addiction is captivity. Some of the people in the room are family members of the hostages who you've had your person in this captive experience, and now you're hoping that they get to come home. And then some of the people in the room are either hostages who long ago were freed, that's our alumni, former hostage people, or some of you just weirdly are here, and you might want to ask a higher power what brought you here. So, because I have this theory that people don't get here by accident, but you may be captive in a way you're not yet awake to, or my sponsor, for example, my AA sponsor, his job changed over the years. He worked in communications, and then he worked in a large company in public relations, and then they moved him into the employee assistance program. So now he's 50-some years sober, he's long retired, but he used to tell me all the time, he said, Jack, here I was telling people how to handle their drinking, and I was getting smashed. I had a bottle on my desk, and so there might be those of you who have not yet realized that whatever trap you're in is a trap. Okay, phase 1. I'm forgetting the term, but it's the initial it's the initial moment at which the hostage is plucked out of the captive situation. And so triage, right? There's a need to figure out what is urgent. There's a medical examination, there's a quick psychological examination, and there's all that kind of rudimentary assessment. Well, that happens here in the building that's called the NEAG Medical Building. It's our detox. And really very, very similar. So when people are coming here, it took me a while to really catch on to this. When I started here in 2008, I was a long time in my sobriety, and I was already, I'd gone through the seminary and become a pastor, and here I was becoming a chaplain. And it shook me to be able to be right next to people who were just coming off the bricks of their addiction use. Because it's not what I saw in AA all the time. I used to go to AA meetings all the time. And yes, every once in a while in AA meeting you have somebody who's like brand new. But today, many, many people need access to medical support because, first of all, the brain's foggy. I know one of the things we worry about a little bit is we have you sign stuff, and a lot of you are like, well, I didn't sign that. I didn't tell you could talk to my mom, and like, well, yeah, you did. And then people are vomiting, or they're trembling, and or they may have be at risk of, or even have a seizure, or be and today we have these things called tapers where we can keep. So it's like landing the plane out of the POW experience into the capacity to have a workable circumstance. And one of my friends and colleagues here has helped me realize that a good way of thinking about the trajectory of people in terms of care with us is that the earliest stage there, that initial phase, is one where our skills help the person survive in a very intense way. It's like an infant or whatever. An infant cannot thrive on their own. And I'm not trying to make babies of you, but I'm trying to tell you that many of you who were at the wristband when you first got here needed a lot of help. You need a lot of help. And that's probably true. If you're a PW, have you been nourished properly? Have you been, have you been beaten? Did the rescue operation itself cause any kind of immediate medical injury? And also, are you psychologically terribly traumatized? Can you even speak? What's going on? And to me, there's a strong correlation between the phase one of the military's process of hostage reintegration and the very earliest phases of care in an addiction recovery setting. The second phase, though, and I do remember the name of it because it struck me as curious, is the phase they call a transition location. And by this, what they mean is that they take the hostage or hostages and they put him in an intermediate spot, not like the field hospital or whatever, but they move them in. And we hear about this sometimes. We hear about people who have been removed from hostage taking, and they're in Germany or they're in some other, but they're on sort of like U.S. military soil. So they know they can get a hamburger and fries or whatever. There's that desire to have a kind of a touch base with reality. But there's also a process, and I'm sure that the family members get impatient. Give me my husband or my son or my daughter or my wife back. Now, why are you holding them in Germany? You just went we took all this trouble to get them freed. Let's get them home. But the hostage reintegration process has learned that there's benefit and value from a transition location period. Not a defined length of time, but more a sort of defined set of objectives. And those objectives include debriefing, additional psychological and medical evaluation, but also, and I thought this was so interesting, they call it psychological decompression. What is that? So, it's a great word, actually. If you've had psychological compression, when all of a sudden you release the holds that prevent psychological expansion, there might be some work needed to help people develop safety, trust, and just what is it to actually inhabit my skin and come to like that. I've joked a lot that in my early recovery, one of the things I had to do was experience. I started having these I'd be sick in my stomach, or my ears would get red, or whatever. And I think, what is that? And then somebody said, Jack, those are feelings. And I was that out of touch with my emotional capacity in my active use. And I used alcohol and drugs to dodge, duck, and paper over feelings. Now, at the 13th scotch, I might get tearful, I might get angry, I might get whatever. So I might have what appeared to be emotional meltdowns, but often that was in a blackout or very close to a blackout stage. And the next morning, there was no actual resolution from the cathartic. It was a non-cathartic, flashing of what was being contained underneath, rather than an authentic emotional engagement, which I've learned. It's taken me a long time to learn to access my emotions. And this is the thing, even in the transition location phase, you're not going to fix everything. You just have to figure out kind of how sick is this person from this captivity experience, and how much, what immediate support do they still need. So there's still a need for a significant amount of assistance in this second phase. Interesting now, the third phase. So the third phase is, and I kept forgetting it on the drive up this morning, I could not, and then I looked on a piece of paper, home base. So that's like baseball metaphor, right? To touch home base. And of course, that's what probably the previously enslaved person and the family member wants, is to get you home. But it turns out that's a risky thing. I used to tell this story about a plant, a tarragon plant, that gets removed from a garden because it's sick, and then it gets put right back in the same hole, the same dirt, with the same light, with the same water, right? And that plant has a risk of becoming sick again because it's how it got sick before. It's in the context in which it got sick before. So going back, and that's not necessarily true with military hostage experience, of course, but it's kind of true with addictive experience. So that's one way in which the two models maybe differ, is that the captivity that was being experienced was right in the geographic and familial and social and employment context, to which now we're trying to have the person re-enter, and somehow re-enter more successfully than they did previously. So that's a good observation. I didn't have that in my prep. Okay. The home base return also, and I think I forgot to say about the second phase, stood out like chalk and highlight, like red chalk and highlights to me when I read it, because oh my gosh, that's so relevant to this. What they found when they bring multiple hostages together to a transition location is that a crucial point is to let the hostages work with each other. That they will often do better at helping each other begin to prepare for the next step than professionals just putting their lab coats on and being the helpers, right? So those who have known the horror of the preceding enslavement experience can be of more help to each other than sometimes people who have not really accessed that misery. Well, isn't that interesting? I can't tell you how many times I have patients who are I need more one-on-one with my therapist, and I need this, and Saturdays are just downtime, and it's just stupid or whatever. That's not necessarily true, but those kind of complaints. And yet, when you talk to people who come back to chapel and get 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year points, and you're like, what do you remember? They're like, I remember the driver, or I remember, the pizza night, or whatever. And it's hostages with hostages that deliver more medicine than you would think. So this is part of the magic of a residential treatment experience that's very hard to sort of pin down clinically, but it's evidentially, in this sense, anecdotally, we can find people who will bear witness to the reality that the thing they most remember and that had the most impact on them was the love that was experienced between people that shared their suffering. Awesome. Okay, back to home base. Good to use that phrase. In home base, then family work for the military is what comes into play. So there has to be support with the family to retrieve the person back from their hostage experience. And a bunch of you today are wearing FEP badges, right? You've come into transition location so that we're already we're beginning what will then be really important as those of you matriculate out of this level of care and back into sort of home environments, to realize that it's not just same thing as usual. There will be profound impact those of you who know anything about systems theory know if one element of the system changes, the other elements of the system begin to rearrange themselves in very powerful and extraordinary ways. So if all you thought about this was, hey, we need to get Joe to stop using, I don't mean this Joe, but we need to get Hubert to stop using, and you think Hubert can stop using and the rest of the whole system will not be affected, Hubert's cessation of use will affect the whole system. It inevitably will. It may end up ejecting Hubert if the rest of the system cannot tolerate whatever change would make Hubert able to exist within the system, or it may really elongate whatever becomes Hubert's reintegration into that family system. Eventually that can happen, but sometimes it takes years. Or sometimes the family can do its own work and become a safer receptacle for the previously hostage person now coming back with a post-hostage experience. I think it's a powerful message. I just have to say, I was like, yeah, this to me, it played to me. This made sense to me as I thought about it. In a way that's tragic, but on point. And one of the things that I've learned in recovery is that things that are hard to say and look at shouldn't be like turned from just because they're sad and hard to look at. Like clarity and reality and truth-telling, as painful as it may be, creates the possibility for change. Whereas denial and, compartmentalization and like spin inhibits the possibility for change. Because if we lie about the truth, then we have no hope of movement into a healthier tomorrow. So this is a place where people come who have been captive. And their journey into freedom is not merely a 3 or 5 day detox, and it's not merely a 28-day residential care length of stay. It may not merely be another 4 weeks in a program like our PhD program. The reintegration is a journey, not an event. And it also asks a tremendous amount of those who will be extending hospitality to the person who's being reintegrated. And like Stockholm Syndrome, you remember that? Like this is when people become enamored of their captors and become confused about what's right and wrong and all that sort of stuff. Well, that's really a big piece of this, unfortunately. They call it euphoric recall here. The note, I had a lot of fun doing those drugs. I'm like, yeah, did you forget that you were puking every morning? So just because those experiences betrayed us doesn't mean that we don't feel still a tie to return to the sick world. We can. I can still feel it. 35 years of absence, I can still feel, watch somebody have a beer and think, God, I wish I could have one of those without the consequences, and I can't. So one continues to be prey to this tug of the old enslavement reality. But I come today to proclaim a message of freedom. Freedom is possible. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King had this I Have a Dream speech, and he talked about, when children of one cultural setting, children of another could play together, and our world would be different. Have we gotten there? No. We have work to do to see beyond all of this tribal that is sadly, I think, getting worse instead of better at the moment. But this may be the nature of addiction recovery too, is it may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that means that eventually you've gotten 4 steps, you've gotten positive progress. And I come today to not only proclaim a message of freedom, but a message of hope. This is absolutely a journey that people make all the time. People succeed in this process, especially when it's not conceived of as a magic wand, ping, we send, there's a couple right here that I just think about, they have an amazing story that just would, they were, they've had the long, slow recovery, which is really the right way to think about this. And that's actually a wish that sometimes people say in AA. May you have a long, slow recovery, rather than a quick, fast thing, because the quick, fast thing it's got an implicit little temptation there. Oh, I can do this again. I can get out of this again. I can't tell you how many people who are on our relapse units will say, my first recovery was pretty easy, But man, getting sober the second time was like, whoa, a real terrible thing. So I need to shut up. We have a beautiful gathering of amazing people. You are amazing people, and you deserve to know that you deserve to have this freedom come to your lives. And that's our job as an organization, is to help facilitate your reintegration together as human beings who have love for each other, but where the love has become tainted with the poison that has, gotten in the well of your family trough. So I hope that you feel gratitude. I also hope you feel responsibility. This is work, and it's worth doing. And so, especially if you're here for family process, like engage, like catch the spirit of the vision and the possibility, and then don't give up, because you're 2 steps before the miracle. I hope that you each experience an extraordinary freedom. God bless you. Thanks so much.